So I gave you advance warning. Hopefully that means I have 5 brave volunteers. Can I have a volunteer, someone who was one of the early laborers, 6 a.m.? Anyone want to volunteer? Andy, excellent, thank you. What about 9 a.m.? Thank you, Larry. All right, what about noon? Thank you, Bob. All right, what about 3 p.m.? Maybe a female. Oh, Nancy, excellent. And 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Nancy. 2 Nancy's. All right, thank you, everyone. All right, I'm going to start this morning. I'm going to interview our laborers. Thank you for agreeing to be on our show this morning. Now, Andy, you began work this morning at 6 a.m. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, having received your daily wage, how do you feel right now?
I feel cheated. I busted my hump all day. I sweated. And I feel like I deserve more.
Okay. So, who else here wants to share how they feel about their work today? Yes, what time did you go to work today, Nancy?
I went to work at 3 o'clock, and I was deeply grateful to be given the chance to work, even though I had been standing around all day and no one would hire me. So I am so grateful to be given the same wage as the person at the 6 o'clock. I don't understand it, but I'm glad.
So you were really surprised that you got paid so much. You were just hoping, anything that you'd get would have been good with you, right?
Absolutely.
You were just happy that someone hired you today.
Yes.
All right. What about you, Larry? What time did you go to work?
9.
9 o'clock. So how do you feel with your wage?
Well, when I was a boy, I was visiting one of our friends of a long time, Herb Lawson. And Herb said to me and to his son, Gary, he said, I need you guys to do this for us and I'll pay you $5. I said, okay, that sounded pretty good. So we did the work and we sat down at the table and Herb looked at us and he said, Larry, how much money do you have in your pocket? And I said, I have $3.75. So he pulled out $1.25 and gave me $5. He said, you have your $5. And to Gary, who worked right alongside of me, he said, Gary, how much money have you got? And he said, I have no money. He was smart. He got $5. I said, get him over here, Herb. That's not right. He says, well, you've got $5, don't you? I said, yes, but I expected to be paid $5. You said you were going to pay us $5. I should have 10 now, total, not 5. And I never got satisfaction.
But you remember that story.
Oh yes, I remember.
All this time.
Many of you would probably think that Herb was kind of an infant, but he really wasn't. He was a rock climber, and he would go to these rock shows all around the United States. And the first day, I was down in Monterey, and Herb was down at the Monterey Rock Show. We went there on Sunday, the closing night. And he gathered all of his friends at the end of the show, and he took us all out. It had to be about a $300 bill.
Wow.
And he did that not once, but twice when I was down there.
So then what do you think the point of his exercise with you was on that day?
I'm still thinking about it.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Who else wants to share how they feel? All right. So, Nancy, you went to work at 5 p.m. Is that right? So how do you feel?
I feel surprised and very grateful to get that much money. A little embarrassed that I got as much paid as much as the other workers.
And how are you feeling during the day as you were just waiting and hoping to get work.
I pretty much given up. Pretty much given up. Getting any work.
So like Nancy, you're surprised and grateful. And even a little bit embarrassed. Interesting. All right.
I kind of slept in this morning because I had a cold, and I just thought, well, I'm going to sleep in. I really didn't expect to get hired. So when the landowner hired me, I was very surprised and
At
grateful.
noon?
At noon.
Okay.
I was a little upset because the other workers seemed to sneer at me and look down on me because the generous landowner paid me the same as he paid them, the ones that came this morning. So they kind of looked down on me, and I was a little surprised at that.
Because it wasn't, I mean, you didn't ask to be paid more. It just happened. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming up and sharing. Does anybody have any final thoughts that they want to share? I may still call on you from your seats, but you can sit down. Thank you very much. Can we give them a round of applause? Wow, well, they did an excellent job. I am so grateful for all of your help this morning. So, everyone has a piece of paper, right? So, raise your hand if you got paid today. Everybody's hand should be up, right? That's the good news of this parable. The good news of this parable is that the landowner went out and provided for all of your needs. So you, as the wage earner in your family, you're a daily laborer. All of these people were daily laborers. And they all got up, and as you heard, they didn't all expect to find work that day. But by the grace of God, at the end of the day, each of them had enough to provide for their families, right? So that is the main point of this story, that God, the landowner, is incredibly generous, that God provides for all of our needs, and that at the end of the day, whether we were the one in the morning or the one at night, we all are part of God's kingdom. And that is really good news. Amen?
Amen.
All right, so that's the good news. But practically speaking, I thought about this good news in a new way this time, thinking about this parable. Because we can all sit here and we can all, at the end of the story, we can try to put ourselves in the shoes of this person who came to work at 5 p.m. and is so grateful. I mean, we all know that we should be grateful for the gifts that we have and the gifts that God has given us. But it's natural, right? It's natural to feel a little slighted sometimes as things happen to us in life. I mean, that's a very natural human way to feel. And so, we can't always just make ourselves feel the way we know we should feel, right? We should feel like this 5 p.m. worker who is so grateful and the 3 p.m. worker is so overjoyed. And so I thought, well, how then what can we do in our lives so that it's more likely that we will respond with gratefulness and generosity in a situation? And I started to think, what would happen if the 5 people who were up here, what would happen if they were all best friends? Do you think that the person who worked all day, Andy, like if you were up here with 5 of your best friends, would you still feel the same, or would you maybe feel a little bit differently?
I still feel the same.
Okay. Right. But maybe a little bit, right? As you started to think about it, maybe someone else out there.
I think when I was a kid, there was a sign on a local farm making green beans. I didn't realize how many green beans you had to pick to fill a bushel. When I paid by the bushel. I picked 8 bushels of beans for 10 hours. I got 80 cents. And I said, no, never again. So I know.
Okay. Well, my point though is this, that if we want to feel grateful, we should probably hang out with and surround ourselves, right, with people who feel grateful. And it'll kind of rub off on us. It'll be contagious. That's kind of how I was thinking about it this week. And so I was thinking about how do we surround ourselves with these 5 p.m. people, these 5 p.m. workers, people who are at a place in their life where they are just so overwhelmed by God's grace and God's generosity. And so I was trying to think, well, who are these 5 p.m. people? And of course, the first thing I thought of is new Christians, right? Someone who is new to the Christian faith, who has recently had either for the very first time or has had kind of a rebirth in their faith life. Those are people who are really excited and grateful, right? But it's so interesting, Nancy, that you said ashamed too, because there may be some of that. If someone is returning to church, they may be wrestling with these 2 kinds of feelings. This extreme gratitude to God that God has brought them back into a relationship, but also maybe a little bit of shame and wonderment about how other people are going to react to that. So that was a really deep answer. So new Christians, I know that maybe we don't all, maybe we can't right now think of someone in our lives that we know that is a new Christian, but if you do, if you happen to know someone who shared with you recently that they, are either a new Christian or are experiencing a rebirth, I just encourage you to sit down and talk to that person and hear their story and to see if a little bit of their 5 p.m. excitement rubs off on you. So besides new Christians, who else might have that 5 p.m. experience? And I'm thinking of someone who maybe either themselves or in their family has overcome an illness recently, right? Those are people who have a real palpable sense of God's grace in their life. And so I know many of you care for your neighbors and your friends and your family when they're sick, and I would just encourage you, in addition to those ways that you reach out to them in love, to just sit with them a few months afterwards and really drink in their grace and their gratitude and their understanding of how God was with them in that circumstance. I also thought about people you may know who are living paycheck to paycheck. Janet can probably tell you this in the work that she does with taxes. Some people who live paycheck to paycheck are able to see that as God's grace, that every week God provides for them. Every month God provides for them. Some people just have that gift, and it's not everyone in that situation. But if you know someone and you kind of, in your interactions with them, see that that's their outlook on life, explore that with them. Let them share that gift of generosity and grace with you. And I'm sure you can think of your own examples of other types of 5 p.m. workers that you could go and have a conversation with. But I wanted to end with this call. 5 p.m. people, new members and new worshipers at God's love. So I want you to stand up if you have have joined God's Love or have started worshiping at God's Love in the last 5 years? I know there's a few of you. Yeah. So these people have a radically different perspective on our community, right, than the person who's been here since 6 a.m. in the morning. And they're all wonderful perspectives, and we're so glad to have some charter members here with us today. But I encourage all of you to have a conversation with someone that just stood up and to ask them, you know, where do you see God's grace? Where do you see God's generosity here at God's Love? What is it about our community that captured your attention? And that will really, I think, be an exciting and an energizing conversation for us to have. So those are just some of the ways that I hope that the message of God's good news that we are all loved, we are all provided for, and we are all welcomed by God. Some of the ways that maybe you can drink that in the coming weeks. Amen.